Welcome to the video, weary traveler. Let the world grow quiet for a while. The flicker of light dims, and time unwinds like a scroll, its fibers worn with centuries of memory. As you settle in and your breath grows slower, imagine yourself lying not in your bed, but upon a cool slab of stone, simple place, one that offers little comfort and no softness. The distant hum of city life fades. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a wooden door creaks. Tonight, we'll drift backward into the vast machinery of the Roman world. Not to the generals or emperors, but to those whose names were seldom recorded. The ones who swept the mosaic floors, who stitched the tunics, who harvested olives, ground grain, lit lamps, and sometimes plotted to run the enslaved. Their lives were woven into every corner of Roman society, from marble halls to muddy fields. And though their status placed them far from power, their presence touched everything. A paradox of intimacy and exploitation, of trusted closeness and brutal detachment. We will explore their hours, their labors, their beliefs, and the way Rome both needed and feared them. Through long days and stolen moments, through rebellion and remembrance, through silence and the faint echoes of resistance. So breathe slowly. The past will not hurry. It waits, steady and still. Our story begins in the earliest hour, before the sun stirs behind the 7 hills of Rome. You sleep on stone, not as a punishment, but simply because there is no bed. The stone is worn smooth from the shifting bodies of others who have slept here before you, others whose names are long forgotten. A shallow alcove beneath the stairs, or a cramped annex near the kitchen. These are the quarters of the enslaved, cold in winter, suffocating in summer, always dark. A place not meant for rest, but for absence. Your eyes open before the sun breaks the skyline. The air is still. You are not awakened by your own desire to greet the day, but by the sharp rap of wood on stone. 3 quick knocks at the doorframe. It's the ionator, the door slave, starting his own morning rounds. No words are exchanged. There is no need. The rhythm of your days is fixed and unwavering. You rise quickly, careful not to make noise. Others are still asleep, though not for long, and sound carries easily in these low-walled rooms. You move barefoot over the floor, where dust clings to your soles, and the chill of the morning stone reaches up through your bones. There's no time to wash, only to smooth your tunic, tie the worn cord at your waist, and begin. You can hear the hearth slaves stoking coals in the kitchen nearby, whispering among themselves in quick, tired Latin. Your first task awaits, in the triclinium, the household's formal dining room. Last night, your master hosted a gathering. There were guests reclining on couches, drinking spiced wine and eating dishes of roasted dormice, honey-glazed fish, and olives stuffed with coriander seeds. The musicians played long into the night. The laughter turned loud, then slurred. As expected, the evening ended in excess. You kneel beside the mosaic floor, where delicate tiles form the image of a sea nymph chased by dolphins. Beside her, a bronze mixing bowl has tipped, spilling watered wine across the stones. More pressing, however, is the pile of vomit just beyond the couch. A guest, too rich and too drunk to care, had expelled his meal without warning. The odor is strong partly from the bile itself, partly from the sweet wine and undigested fish. You breathe through your mouth. You work in silence, scrubbing with a long-handled sponge dipped in vinegar and seawater. The sponge is reused, sour with age. Your hands are already cracked from lye, soap, and cold water. the acid stings. You wipe until the floor is clean, though the scent will linger for days. No praise will be offered. Cleanliness is the default. You do it quickly, because if the master or his steward finds you lingering, your next task will be doubled. Elsewhere in the house, other enslaved people are already moving. One carries a chamber pot toward the latrine. Another is smoothing the master's tunic over a heated marble slab. Someone else is grinding barley in a large stone mill, the rhythmic crunch of grain breaking the quiet. The Atrienses, the head of the household slaves, paces slowly, watching for error. He is enslaved too, but he holds authority, and his disfavor carries weight. The household is a complex hierarchy, even among slaves. Some, like the Atrienses or the pedagogus the tutor's slave, enjoy a measure of respect. Others, like you, perform the least dignified tasks. Some are cooks, some are launderers, some serve at table. If the master is especially wealthy, there may be a lector to read aloud, or a scriber to copy letters and records by hand. If he is merely comfortable, as yours is, then each person performs many roles. You may be asked to launder clothes next. Roman laundry is no gentle affair. You will trample tunics in a large stone vat filled with a mixture of water and urine collected from public urinals and prized for its ammonia. The smell clings to your hands for hours. After soaking, you scrub the fabric over rough stone, then beat it against a post. Finally, you rinse it in cold water and hang it on lines in the garden courtyard, where sparrows pick at crumbs. Alternatively, you might be assigned to the Latranatha household toilets. These must be swept, wiped, and restocked with sponges. You may be sent to gather rushes for kindling or to carry messages across the city. If your master is in a good mood, you might help in the garden, pruning herbs and plucking snails from the lettuce. If he's angry, he may send you to fetch firewood from the market, a task that eats away half the day under a heavy load. And still, you have not eaten. Your first meal comes only after the dominus has broken his fast. You will be given scraps, perhaps the crust from a loaf, a few olives, or boiled lentils, thick with ash. On good days, cheese. On bad ones, nothing. Hunger is a familiar ache. You have long since learned not to mention it. The cook, herself enslaved, will give you what she can. Sometimes she offers a small fig or leftover honey cake if no one is watching. You always thank her with your eyes, never your voice. You may wonder, in some part of your mind that still dreams, how you came to this place. You may have been born here, the child of another slave, or captured during a war, sold by traders who marched you in chains across strange terrain. Perhaps you were once free, and detour, misfortuned, delivered you to the auction block. You remember that day only in fragments: the heat, the ropes, the wooden platform in the forum, the man who inspected your teeth and arms. Your name may have been taken from you. If you were Greek, perhaps they gave you a Roman one. If your name was Andronikos, it may have been changed to Andronicus. If you were from Gaul, perhaps your name is now rustic, meant to amuse. Your master once told a guest that he named you Mouse because you're quiet and quick. The guest laughed. You did not. Still, the rhythm of this life brings a kind of numb predictability. The hours roll on. The atrium begins to glow with light. The fountain gurgles in the center, scattering tiny drops of water across the tile. The master passes through, adjusting the folds of his toga. He does not look at you. He rarely does. The domina, his wife, is already seated in the peristyle, dictating a list of purchases to a steward. You are summoned to fetch her embroidery basket, which you know must be kept in the chest with the red lacquered lid. There is no end to the movement, no pause that is your own. You are expected to be invisible, yet always available, to anticipate needs before they are spoken, to read moods, to disappear at the right moment. If you fail, even slightly, you may be punished, not necessarily with violence, but perhaps with extra tasks, denial of food, or confinement. If the failure is serious, then the rod, the whip, or the brand. There are stories passed between whispering lips in the corners of the villa of slaves who were freed, ones who served loyally for decades and were granted manumission, their freedom formally recognized by Roman law. Some even became citizens. But these stories feel distant fables from another world. Your own world is made of buckets, linens, cracked bowls, and commands. Still, in the hush of morning, before the hours truly begin, there are small fragments of peace. The warmth of sunlight slipping through a high window, the sound of a thrush calling from the garden wall, the way the dust glows golden in a sunbeam. You carry these things within you, not because they lessen the weight of your days, but because they help you survive them. This is your morning. It is miserable. It is quiet. It is lived entirely in the service of others. And when tomorrow comes, it will begin the same way. The morning has passed, though the day still stretches endlessly before you. In the Roman world, time does not flow as it does today, measured in numbered hours or watched on a ticking clock. Instead, the day is divided loosely by the sun's position in the sky, marked by shadows creeping across courtyards and by the sequence of tasks that never truly end. By mid-morning, the villa hums with motion. You have already scrubbed, carried, fetched, and folded. Your hands smell of ash and vinegar, and your feet bare against the tiles are sore from the countless steps taken before most in the household have even stirred their first cup of watered wine. The atrium echoes with activity. Somewhere, a dog barks twice, then falls silent. A child's voice calls for a ball. The linen curtains flutter in the breeze, and outside, the dust of the street drifts in through the open door. You are sent to the kitchen next. The cook, a hard-faced woman who lost her accent years ago, hands you a bundle of greens to wash. She does not speak except to instruct. Her domain is one of fire and knife and blistering speed. You kneel beside a clay basin, plunging the leaves into cold water and swishing away the soil. Beet tops, coriander stems, tender shoots of mustard. These will become part of the evening meal for the master's family, not for you. Sometimes you sneak a broken stalk, pressing it between your teeth for the clean snap and bitterness, just to remind yourself of flavor. But you are cautious. The kitchen is not a forgiving place. Behind you, another slave slices onions into thin rings, his eyes streaming but his hands steady. Across the room, two boys knead dough, grunting softly as they press their fists into the thick, pale mass. The smell of yeast and smoke rises. You work until your muscles ache, until your arms tremble from repetition. You carry baskets of produce. You haul buckets of water from the cistern. You scrub copper pots with crushed seashells and sand. At one point, you are sent into the garden to pick rosemary and thyme. The sun is high now, and the heat gathers on the stones. Your back sticks to your tunic as you stoop, fingers brushing through aromatic leaves that cling to your skin. By midday, the house quiets again. The Dominus is meeting a visitor in the tablinum, and his voice floats lazily through the colonnade. You are not to be seen or heard. You retreat to the rear of the villa, where laundry steams in the courtyard and chickens scratch at the edges of the herb beds. You are handed a tunic stiff with dried sweat and told to wash it again properly this time. You nod, though you say nothing. Words from you would not help. Some enslaved people work inside the house, like you. Others work the land beyond it. In the Roman countryside, on large estates known as latifundia, hundreds of slaves toil in the fields. They rise before the first crow of the cock and walk barefoot through thick dew to tend the wheat, barley, and grapes that feed Rome. Their work is harder, more brutal, more exposed. They labor under the sun with iron shackles on their ankles. Overseers on horseback patrol the fields with rods. Compared to them, you are fortunate. At least, that is what you tell yourself. You have shade. You are not chained. You can sometimes rest your feet against the cool stone of the courtyard. Still, you wonder what it would be like to be free. Not merely free of the master's whip or his scorn, but free to walk away, free to choose where to go and when. The idea is dangerous. You have seen the scars on another slave's back thin, pale ridges like river lines, setched by punishment for a failed escape. The day wears on. You are summoned to the cubiculum, the sleeping quarters. There, the domina waits, seated on a low couch, while a musician plucks softly at a lyre in the corner. She has requested you to bring her combs and perfumed oils. You do so quickly, bowing slightly as you enter. She says nothing at first, then flicks her fingers at the oil you've brought. Not that one, the lavender, not the myrrh. You fetch another flask and wait by the wall, still and silent. The room smells of jasmine and warm fabric. You begin to notice the different ways that time bends in this house. For the master and mistress, time stretches languidly, filled with leisure, reading, and discussion. For you, time is segmented, each moment packed with obligation. You are always preparing something, cleaning something, fetching something, assisting someone else's comfort while forgetting your own. In the afternoon, you help tend to the children. One throws his writing tablet across the room, frustrated with his Greek verbs. You retrieve it silently. Another demands a story, and the pedagogus the slave tutor tells one, voice low and deliberate. It is about Odysseus and the sea, about storms and gods. You stand quietly nearby, ears half listening. You have heard the story before. You like the part where he disguises himself, outsmarts the suitors, and reclaims what is his. You wonder what disguise you would wear, if ever given the chance. Later, you are sent into the storeroom. The heat in the air has thickened, and you walk slowly past the amphorae of oil and wine, your fingers brushing the rough pottery as you go. One is leaking, and you are told to clean the floor around it. The scent of sour wine and olive pulp makes your stomach clench. You haven't eaten since morning. You might not eat again until tomorrow. And still, there are tasks. The fountain in the atrium must be scrubbed. The lamps in the corridor must be refilled with oil and checked for soot. The dogs need feeding. The gate must be barred before sunset. You wonder briefly about the other your fellow slaves. Some of them you barely know. One came from Numidia, with dark eyes and long hands. Another from Thrace, his Latin thick with accent. Each of them carries their own burdens, their own private worlds, folded neatly beneath quiet obedience. As dusk nears, the mood in the house changes. Candles are lit. The dominus retires to his study. The domina reclines in the peristyle with figs and honey. The children settle down. You are permitted a brief pause, leaning against the kitchen doorway, staring out into the twilight. The sky has turned a soft violet, and the first star appears near the horizon. You feel your breath slow, just for a moment. You will sleep again on stone. You will curl into yourself and hope no one wakes you before dawn. You know this day will repeat itself in its rhythm and demands, again and again. Yet in that repetition, in that endless stretch of labor and small silences, there is also a kind of pattern, a shape to your days, however harsh. This is the long, quiet reality of servitude in Rome. Not just the cruelty or the fear, but the weariness, the sameness, the way time slips like water through your hands while you serve those who never truly see you. The way you disappear, not with violence, but with routine, and still endure. You wake, you labor, you listen, you remember. In your mind, there are still places untouched. A song you once knew, a field from childhood, a name, perhaps your own, that no one uses anymore, but that you whisper into the darkness before sleep. And then, once more, the endless day begins. There are moments in history when the silence breaks, when the long, slow suffering of millions gives way to a sound the world cannot ignore, a clash, a cry, a refusal. In the Roman Republic, the machinery of enslavement had grown vast. Every conquest brought new bodies, defeated soldiers, displaced families. Entire villages poured into the Roman economy as chattel. They were absorbed into mines, farms, kitchens, brothels, and temples. They became tutors, scribes, and gladiators. They built the roads. They entertained the masses. They disappeared behind doors of villas and underground prisons, their lives passing unrecorded. But then came a slave whose name even the powerful could not forget, Spartacus. He was not Roman. He was Thracian likely, from the rugged lands that now lie across parts of modern Bulgaria or northern Greece. He may have once been a soldier himself, serving as an auxiliary in the Roman legions, then deserting or rebelling, only to be captured and enslaved. His early life is blurred by time, recorded differently by Roman writers who shaped his story according to their fears or scorn. But one thing is clear. He was sold to a ludus gladiatoriusa gladiator training school located in Capua. Imagine that world. High walls, barred doors, the clang of wooden practice swords, the doctors, strict trainers, enforcing drills with severity. Dozens of men, stripped of their names and freedoms, drilled daily in the art of theatrical death. Some eager for the fame, others just trying to survive. It is there, in the dust of the training yard, that the seed of rebellion took root. In 73 BCE, Spartacus and around 70 others conspired to escape. The plot was discovered, but not in time. Using kitchen knives, skewers, and seized weapons, they fought their way out of the compound. They raided a passing caravan for real armed short swords, spears, and shields, and fled to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. It began as a desperate act, one not unlike many failed escapes before. But Spartacus was different. He was no simple fugitive. He was a strategist, and he quickly became a leader. More followed. The numbers swelled: runaways from other farms, escaped gladiators, field workers, even some freemen driven by hunger or discontent. Within months, they were no longer a ragged band, but an army of slaves. Rome was caught off guard. The Republic had grown used to suppressing rebellion on foreign soil. not in its own backyard. At first, they dispatched only local militias, poorly trained, hastily armed. These early forces underestimated Spartacus and were decisively defeated. The rebels were nimble, mobile, motivated. They moved along the spine of the Apennines, slipping through mountain passes and ambushing Roman supply trains. Spartacus trained his followers not merely to survive, but to fight as a disciplined force. He reportedly forbade the looting of temples. He issued rations and rotated duties. And while his followers numbered in the tens of thousands, he never lost control. In some towns, the rebels were greeted as liberators. In others, they found new recruits, more slaves, more bodies hardened by labor and loss. It is easy, now, to imagine the growing unease in Rome. Senators whispering in shadowed porticos, landowners sending guards to protect their estates, markets filled with rumors they're coming north. Spartacus was seen near Beneventum. They have horses now. Panic crept in, but Spartacus had no interest in taking the city. According to many accounts, his goal was escape, not conquest. He wanted to lead his people over the Alps, into the forests and mountains beyond Roman reach. Freedom lay in the north, safety in the distance. He began moving his army northward, away from Rome, but not everyone agreed. Some among his followers, particularly those more committed to vengeance than liberty, urged him to turn back and attack the capital. Rome, to them, was not a distant threat, it was the beast that had devoured their families. In this, the rebellion began to fracture. Discipline faltered. Some rebel commanders broke away, launching smaller raids. Others sought personal glory. Still, Spartacus pressed on, defeating multiple Roman legions along the way. His tactical brilliance could not be ignored. He used the terrain to his advantage, staged ambushes, lured Roman troops into traps, and struck where he was least expected. For nearly 2 years, he remained undefeated. Imagine, for a moment, the days within that army. Thousands of former slaves gathered in camps made of stolen tents and makeshift shelters. Each night, the fires burned high. Meat roasted on spits. Guards took shifts. The wounded were tended by those with skill. Children, too, were there born into a strange freedom they had never known. It was not an easy life, but it was a chosen one. Men and women who had once feared the crack of a master's whip now marched beneath their own banners, flags stitched together from torn tunics and stolen linens. They trained with whatever weapons they had, from Roman gladi to sharpened farming tools. They built rafts to cross rivers, carved signal marks into trees, and shared whispered news of victories, defeats, and betrayals. The world held its breath, but Rome would not let this rebellion stand. In 71 BCE, the Senate gave command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in the Republic. He brought not only soldiers, but the cruel efficiency of money and reputation. Crassus restored discipline through fear. He reportedly revived the practice of decimation, executing every 10th man in units that retreated or disobeyed orders. Spartacus tried to negotiate. Some sources say he offered terms. Crassus refused, and so began the final confrontation. Trapped in southern Italy, Spartacus found himself cornered. The sea was blocked, supplies ran low, and yet he fought again and again. His final battle took place in Lucania, where his forces were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The rebels held their ground as long as they could. Spartacus himself is said to have charged directly at Crassus, fighting through waves of soldiers in a last, desperate push. He was killed in the fighting. His body was never found. The rebellion ended in blood. Crassus took no chances. He ordered the crucifixion of over 6,000 captured rebels, lining the Via Appia, the road from Capua to Rome, with their bodies. For days, travelers passed beneath this terrible gallery of punishment, a grim reminder of Rome's power. The message was clear. Those who rose up would not be forgiven, and yet something had changed. The revolt had shown the Republic that its enslaved population was not passive, that within the silence of labor and obedience, resistance still smoldered. Rome would never again ignore the threat of insurrection. Slaves were watched more closely. Escape routes were fortified. Gladiator schools became more like prisons than academies. But the name Spartacus lingered, even in Rome's own histories, written by men who loathed him. He was remembered with a reluctant respect. He had not merely escaped. He had organized, strategized, and nearly outwitted the greatest power in the known world. He had turned the tools of oppression into weapons of defiance. And for those who remained enslaved, his story passed from ear to ear. In kitchens and quarters, in whispered moments after midnight, his name was spoken with awe. Spartacus, the Thracian, the gladiator who would not kneel. Perhaps, lying again on cold stone, one could imagine a different life, a different ending. One where the mountains were crossed, where fields bloomed beyond Roman roads, where freedom was not punished but lived. Even in defeat, Spartacus became a symbol not of victory, but of the possibility of resistance. A brief, blazing moment when the rhythm of submission broke and a different song was sung. One of courage, of choice, of rebellion. The rebellion ended in blood, but its echoes lingered. In the immediate sense, the body of Spartacus was lost, never recovered among the thousands strewn across the battlefield. Yet the Roman state, so proud and unshakable in its dominance, could not simply dust itself off and carry on as before. The revolt had left a mark on memory, on infrastructure, and perhaps most enduringly, on fear. The Via Appia is a long, straight road. It stretches from Capua in the south, where Spartacus had first escaped the ludus, to the heart of Rome itself. It is a feat of engineering carefully layered stone, straight-cut ditches, and aligned milestones. But for a time, it became something else entirely. A gallery of punishment, a spectacle of warning. Crassus, though victorious, was not interested in mercy. He did not see rebellion as something to suppress and then forget. He saw it as wrought a disease in the body politic of Roman, believed it must be cut away with absolute precision. And so, to make his message clear, he ordered the crucifixion of over 6,000 captured rebels, one cross every few dozen feet, 6,000 bodies raised high along the route, flanked by marching legions and the slow wagons of Roman merchants forced to pass beneath them. The crucifixion was not swift. It was never intended to be. It was a punishment meant for spectacle, for maximum deterrence. A body could hang for days before death came. Travelers along the Via Appia would have seen faces bloated from exposure, arms stretched wide in final defiance or agony, and the ragged remnants of stolen tunics fluttering in the breeze. But the Roman writers who recorded this, Sinapian, Plutarch, Florus, rarely dwelled on the suffering. They reported the crucifixions the way one might report a harvest, a census, a victory, factually, efficiently, and with a hint of satisfaction. In the homes of Rome's elite, the revolt was quickly reframed. It was not a reckoning, not a question of moral consequence. It was a disruption, an inconvenience, a threat to property. The hands that harvested, built, cleaned, and served were almost always those in bondage. To admit that these people could rebel was to admit that they were not merely tools, that they had thoughts, alliances, and desires, that they could plan and resist and even win. The great households began to impose stricter rules. Slaves caught whispering or gathering in groups were punished immediately. Permission was needed for the smallest of activities, walking to market, attending a funeral, carrying messages beyond the villa's walls. Those who worked in fields were more often shackled, their tools carefully inventoried at day's end. In urban centers, the fear was more subtle. Rome itself was home to hundreds of thousands of enslaved individuals. They moved among the crowds, served in temples, bathed in public baths, and walked the same roads as free citizens. The threat wasn't that they would revolt openly, but that they could if emboldened. Slave markets adjusted accordingly. New arrivals were more thoroughly inspected, their teeth checked, their backs scrutinized for scars that might suggest combat experience. Prices shifted. Gladiator schools were restructured, with heavier oversight and fewer freedoms between matches. Those who ran the ludi began to act more like prison wardens than trainers. Still, Rome could not cleanse itself of what had happened. Senators debated whether Crassus had acted justly or too brutally. Some praised his decisiveness. Others feared he had created martyrs. Even Pompey, returning from campaigns in Hispania, tried to claim credit for the final defeat, adding fuel to his rivalry with Crassus. Their political contest played out in the shadow of rebellion, using the bodies of the dead as stepping stones toward power. But among the enslaved themselves, a different kind of reckoning took place. In the kitchens and workshops, in the fields and laundries, they spoke little of Spartacus, not openly, but in the stillness of night, when the master had gone to bed and the fire was low, someone might murmur the name Spartacus, or the Thracian, or simply he who rose. They remembered not just the battles, but the movement, the chance to walk without chains, to carry a blade and decide its use, to camp beneath the stars without orders, to eat beside comrades rather than at the foot of another's table. That memory, though fleeting, was enough to sustain a kind of quiet defiance, a belief that things, though unlikely, might one day change. In truth, most of the empire's slaves did not revolt. Most endured, adjusted, or simply survived. Resistance was not always rebellion. It could be slower, quieter, harder to trace. A broken amphora that no one saw fall. A task performed incorrectly, but convincingly so. A whispered story passed down to a child. A name hidden and remembered. And yet, the shadow of Spartacus never fully faded. Roman writers struggled with his legacy. They painted him as a brute, then as a military genius. Spartacus had revealed a truth Rome preferred to ignore, that its entire structure rested on the backs of those it called subhuman, and that those backs could, in rare moments, stand upright. Crassus, meanwhile, basked in the political rewards of victory, but his brutality followed him. Later writers would recall his crucifixions as both necessary and excessive, and yet his life would end far from Rome, on the Parthian frontier, his body desecrated, his head used in foreign theater as a prop, a fate that might seem, to some, a kind of poetic justice. Back in Rome, life resumed its rhythm. The feasts continued. The games went on. Slaves prepared meals, mended togas, held umbrellas above senators' heads. But beneath it all, in the silence of service, the ghost of rebellion drifted, not in open talk, not in raised fists, but in the gaze of a man walking with purpose across a field, in the hush that fell when a soldier passed, in the slight hesitation before obeying an order, in dreams, perhaps, of a hilltop camp and a leader who once gave them another name. The aftermath of Spartacus's rebellion was not merely blood and silence. It was remembrance, a mark not on the skin, but beneath it, a knowledge that power, even vast and ancient, could be challenged. And though Rome would forget many of its names and victories, it would never truly forget the fear Spartacus left behind. History leaves traces not always in books or scrolls, but in the quiet persistence of what remains buried, broken, or half forgotten. The Roman world has passed, its language softened by centuries, its emperors reduced to statues in museums. But beneath the earth, in layers of dust and ash, pieces of daily life wait to be uncovered, and among them are the fragments of the enslaved. Slavery in ancient Rome was a system both vast and intimate. It shaped villas and battlefields, temples and taverns. It left behind structures, tools, inscriptions, and, at times, bones. Yet its people, the millions who served without freedom or voice rarely, left records of their own. They spoke quietly, lived in the shadows of their masters, and died often without grave markers. Their legacy must be reconstructed, not through what they said, but through what was left behind in silence. One of the most haunting forms of evidence lies in human remains. Across the empire, archaeologists have unearthed skeletons bearing the signs of servitude, vertebrae compressed by heavy loads, limbs misshapen from repetitive labor, teeth worn down by coarse grain. But more telling still are the collars. In several Roman burial sites, skeletons have been found with iron rings still fixed around the neck. These were not ornamental. They were servile collarza, form of physical and social branding. Some were inscribed with humiliating warnings. "I have run away. Return me to my master." Others bore names, addresses, or prayers that the wearer would not escape. To find one still clasped to bone is to confront, without metaphor, the weight of bondage. One such collar, now preserved in a museum in Rome, reads, "Tenetur ad domum domini me, teen mini fugium." I belong to the house of my master. Hold me, lest I flee. It was not designed to be removed easily. These collars were sometimes locked with rivets, worn continuously, a permanent declaration of status. They offered no dignity, no concealment. They turned the body itself into an advertisement of ownership. Elsewhere, the clues are more subtle. In Pompeii, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE froze an entire city in place. Among the lavish villas and bustling streets, archaeologists uncovered servant quarters, low-ceilinged rooms without windows, positioned close to kitchens or latrines. One such space, barely 2 meters long, held a wooden bed frame, a few ceramic jugs, and a rough linen tunic. The ashes preserved even the grain of the wood and the wrinkles in the fabric. In another house, a set of wax tablets was discovered, a kind of ancient account book. It listed sales, debts, and inventories. Included in the list were names and prices of enslaved individuals. Some were valued more highly, perhaps, for their youth, their literacy, or their skills. Others, marked with lower sums, were likely laborers, or those considered sick or aged. Reading the entries, one is struck by the coldness of the transaction. A man's life, measured in circes, a child's future reduced to digits. Villas in the countryside offer similar insights. The elite estates often had distinct architectural zones: the pars urbana for the family, the pars rustica for farm operations, and the pars fructuaria for storage and processing. Within these areas, slave quarters can be identified by their simplicity, their proximity to stables or granaries, and their lack of decoration. No frescoes, no mosaics, just stone, wood, and silence. One villa in southern Gaul, uncovered during a highway expansion project, revealed a network of small rooms connected by narrow corridors clearly designed for laborers. In a corner, archaeologists found shackles, not ceremonial, not symbolic, just worn iron, shaped to close around wrists or ankles. They were rusted, fragile from centuries in soil, but unmistakable. Other discoveries come in the form of tools. In Ostia, Rome's ancient port city, remnants of laundry workshops known as fulanica were excavated. These included large vats for soaking clothes in urine and clay tiles with foot-shaped indentations used by slaves who stomped garments clean. Nearby, scraps of leather were found, likely from sandals worn down by hours of wet work. No names attached, just the echo of footsteps in a profession that left little behind. In more fortunate cases, a name does survive. Inscriptions carved on funerary altars or votive offerings sometimes commemorate a loyal servant. To Fellatio, slave of Marcus, who served faithfully for 10 years, or, more rarely, to Anthus, once enslaved, now freed. These stones stand alone in necropolises, their modest size a contrast to the towering tombs of senators and generals. But they speak quietly of lives lived with diligence, and of relationships complicated by ownership. Even more revealing are the household shrines, the Lareria, where both free and enslaved Romans worshipped domestic gods. In some homes, small statues of ancestors stood beside tokens left by slaves' coins, food offerings, tiny carved figurines. These items suggest a spiritual life, not erased by bondage. Though legally considered property, many enslaved people retained or adapted their cultural practices, praying to their own deities, offering tribute in secret or alongside their masters. In a villa near Herculaneum, a painting depicts two figures, one dressed in fine Roman attire, the other bare-chested with a shaved head, likely a servant. They are shown together, sharing a cup of wine in what may be a rare scene of camaraderie, or perhaps performance. The art does not explain, but it hints at the complicated human relationships beneath the rigid laws of slavery. Across the empire, even in its distant reach, Spitania, Dacia, Numidia, similar patterns emerge. Excavations in Roman forts have revealed slave quarters and burial sites with grave goods far simpler than those of their overseers. A wooden comb, a worn brooch, a crude clay lamp with the faint outline of a god pressed into its side. Each object, however small, adds a thread to the broader tapestry of Roman life, and there is something soothing, in a quiet way, about these remains. They are not grand monuments or triumphal arches. They are not declarations of conquest or glory. They are humble, worn, and partial, but they persist. Through fire, flood, and time, they remain testimonies not to power, but to endurance. The enslaved of Rome did not write histories. They left no autobiographies, no epic poems, but their hands shaped the empire. Their footsteps wore the stones smooth, Their breath warmed the villas each morning, and their work kept the wheels of commerce and conquest turning. And now, in layers of dust and ruin, they are still present. The next time you pass a Roman artifact in a museum, a tablet, a cup, a bolt of fabric paws, consider not just the patricians who owned it, but the hands that cleaned it, folded it, carried it across roads under the weight of expectation. Consider the nameless woman who tended the loom, the boy who stirred the dye vats, the man who carried amphorae until his spine bent. They are there, still. Not in the marble busts of emperors, but in the shadows of excavation trenches, in soot-stained hearths and abandoned sandals, in broken walls and rusted tools. Not gone, but waiting. Waiting for the patient hands of archaeologists to find them. Waiting to be seen again. The body could be owned, but the soul perhaps remained untouched. In ancient Rome, slavery was a matter of legal fact and daily visibility, but belief, that interior realm of faith and ritual, moved in quieter ways. It traveled with the enslaved, tucked into memory, whispered in the shadows of kitchens, and offered up to gods beneath the flicker of oil lamps. The Roman world was soaked in religion. It lived in thresholds marked by offerings, in the smoke curling from household shrines, in sacrifices made before journeys and contracts and births. The elite might sacrifice bulls at grand temples, make vows to Mars before a campaign, or consult augurs on the proper time to marry. But these public, state-sanctioned rituals were not the only kind. Beneath them, like roots beneath a stone floor, spread an older, more intimate network of belief. This was where the enslaved found their spiritual foothold. Imagine a Roman domus, late at night. The master has gone to bed. The torches have been extinguished, the shutters closed. In a corner of the atrium, there is a small niche carved into the Walla Lararium, the household shrine. Within it, small painted figures stand watch, the Lares and Pinides, guardian spirits of home and pantry. On special days, a member of the household will place bread, incense, or wine before them. And sometimes, when no one is looking, so will the enslaved. These offerings are quiet: a folded crust of bread, a pinch of flour, a whispered plea in a dialect long out of use. The household gods are witnesses to all who live beneath the roof, not just those who own it. And in this private moment, the enslaved person finds a space to hope, to ask, to remember. Not all enslaved people in Rome worshipped the Roman gods. Many brought their own. Rome was, after all, a vast mosaic of cultures: Greece, Egypt, Thrace, Judea, Gaul, Syria. Enslaved individuals might pray to Isis or Mithras, to Cybele or Serapis, to Baal or Tanit. These were not gods of empire, but gods of survival, of love and loss, of cycles and endurance. Some prayers were ancient chants passed down through families long since separated. Others were improvised, shaped by grief and longing. In the cities, temples to foreign gods stood beside those of Jupiter and Apollo. Some welcomed slaves and freed persons as worshippers. The cult of Isis, for instance, with its rituals of purification and rebirth, drew followers from all levels of Roman society. It promised renewal and care to those discarded by the world. In the dim candlelight of an Isis temple, a slave might kneel beside a freedwoman, their voices raised in the same hymn. Then there were the mystery religion's exclusive rites, known only to initiates. Mithraism, particularly popular among soldiers and some freedmen. offered an underground brotherhood with symbolic meals and initiation rituals. The rites were secretive, held in subterranean chambers, carved with images of the god Mithras slaying a cosmic bull. These spaces, cool and quiet, offered an escape from daily roles and a chance to belong to something eternal. Even among those who had adopted the Roman pantheon, the practice of religion was not merely duty, it was emotional survival. A prayer might be offered before a whipping or after. A vow might be whispered during childbirth. A small stone, tucked into a garment, might be carried for protection. These rituals helped create order in a life where so little was in one's control. Death, too, brought its own rituals and anxieties. Roman law did not always allow slaves a proper burial. Some were buried without ceremony, in common graves or pits outside city walls. Others, particularly those who served long and loyally in a household, were granted tombs or inscriptions. A few pooled their money into burial societies, funeratitia, kind of mutual aid organization that ensured members would be buried with dignity. These collegia were more than logistical arrangements. They offered fellowship. Members met, dined, and honored the dead together. They carved names into stone, told stories, remembered the deceased as individuals. Here, a slave might be mourned, not as property, but as a person. One such inscription reads simply, "To Daphnis, my dear companion, may the earth lie light upon you." The enslaved also participated in ancestor worship, but often with a quiet twist. The Romans placed great emphasis on familia. The household lineage passed from father to son. Portrait masks of ancestors were displayed in noble homes. But for the enslaved, their own ancestry had been stripped away. They could not call upon honored fathers or proudly named grandmothers, and so they remembered them privately. Sometimes this meant quietly honoring an unnamed mother who had taught them a song. Sometimes it meant lighting a candle and whispering into the air for a father lost to conquest. These personal rituals, often invisible to masters, were a way of preserving identity, resisting erasure. They were acts of spiritual autonomy. There are rare moments in the historical record when we glimpse these inner lives more directly. A graffito scratched on a wall in a Roman tavern reads, "Felix prays to Fortuna for better work." Perhaps Felix was a slave sent to deliver wine, or a freedman struggling to earn a living. Either way, his prayer crewed quick. Personal tells us what mattered, not grandeur, not conquest, just a better tomorrow. In other graffiti, we find symbols of hope. Fish scratched beside crosses, signs of early Christian belief, spreading quietly among the enslaved and downtrodden. Christianity, in its early years, found adherents among those on the margins. It offered a kingdom not of this world, a reversal of earthly power. To a slave, the promise that the last shall be first held a powerful comfort. And yet, for all the belief, there was also doubt, anger, silence. Some must have turned inward, ceasing to pray. Others found solace, not in gods, but in stories, memories, or companionship. Religion was not always a comfort. For some, it was a burden. For others, a lifeline. It varied, as all things do. But throughout, a pattern emerges, one of quiet resilience. Not through rebellion or revolt, but through belief, through ritual, through meaning crafted from fragments. These were not grand theologies. They were daily acts of hope. A thumb rubbed over a charm, a word mouthed silently during labor, a candle lit after everyone else had gone to sleep. Even now, When archaeologists uncover a room with soot on the walls and worn stones by the door, they sometimes find traces of incense, a burnt offering, a broken figurine. These objects tell us that belief, like water, finds a way, even in the driest soil, even in captivity. Slavery was, in many ways, a stripping away of name, family, autonomy. But in belief, the enslaved found ways to remain whole, to speak, even when forbidden, to remember, even when forgotten, to hope, even in darkness. The world of Roman slavery was not defined solely by shackles and fields. Just as crucial to the structure of the empire were its households of wealth, quiet, perfumed realms, tucked behind courtyard walls, where sunlight drifted through colonnades and fountains murmured softly through the afternoon. In these spaces, slavery took on another form, refined, formal, intimate, and it is here, in this contrast, that we find the mirror image of the lives we've explored, the life of the mistress, the Roman patrician woman, draped in fine wool, shaded by silks, surrounded always by the silent labor of others. To understand the social elite of Rome is to understand the layers of performance that defined their every hour. A woman of standing born to a noble house, or married into one, was not idle, as the ancient stereotype might suggest. Her life was orchestrated with precision, each moment a reflection of status, influence, and restraint. And behind every move she made, a quiet staff of enslaved people brought her world into focus. Let us imagine her day. The morning light filters into her atrium. The air is still cool, carrying with it the faint scent of myrtle and crushed thyme from the garden. Before she has even opened her eyes, a young girl, perhaps 11 or 12, creeps in softly. She is one of many personal attendants, purchased or gifted to the family, trained from youth to anticipate needs without instruction. She opens the shutters, folds back the coverlet, brings a small silver basin and a clean cloth to wash the mistress's face. Another slave enters bearing garments, wool dyed soft blue or creamy white. The fabric has been brushed and scented with lavender. A third holds out accessories, earrings of carved amber, a necklace of freshwater pearls, a hairnet spun from gold thread. Each piece selected not only for beauty, but for message. This woman is refined, modest, untouchable. She sits before a bronze mirror, held up by yet another hand. Her hair is arranged in an elaborate style, perhaps the notice, a carefully twisted front bun favored by imperial women. This may take an hour or more. The stylist, a slave known as an ornatrix, works in silence, weaving braids, adding pins, smoothing curls with olive oil. If she tugs too hard or falters in technique, the punishment may be sharp, though never spoken of in public. The patrician woman's mourning continues with correspondence. She does not write her own letters. Instead, a literate Greek slave, likely a former teacher, now assigned to secretarial duties, takes dictation. Together, they compose polite replies to invitations, letters of thanks to relatives, or notes of guidance to household stewards. Every word is carefully chosen. Every greeting, every closing phrase is measured. Status is upheld not just in clothing or posture, but in syntax. She moves to the peristyle, where columns ring a central garden. The sun is warmer now. A light meal is laid out: figs, goat cheese, fresh bread, a dish of olives. The cook, an enslaved man trained in Campanian kitchens, stands just out of sight, awaiting feedback. The food must satisfy, but not overwhelm. It is midday, after all, and indulgence belongs to the evening. Later, She hosts visitors, other women of standing, or perhaps a relative from another gens. They speak in hushed voices, seated on low couches, sipping watered wine from delicate glass cups. They do not discuss politics directly. That would be unseemly. But they mention their husbands' appointments, their sons' studies, the latest scandal whispered in the forum. During this time, entertainers are called the female lyre player. Herself enslaved, begins a soft melody. A flute may follow. If the guests are trusted, the mistress might summon her body servant to read a few verses of Ovid aloud, or to recite a short passage from Sappho translated and trimmed, of course, to suit Roman tastes. The musicians are never introduced by name. The visitors depart before the sun begins to dip. And then comes the bath. The elite bath, not only at public complexes, but often at home, in private rooms with heated floors and scented water. The mistress undresses with assistance, her garments removed and folded by waiting hands. She steps into warm water, perfumed with rose or bay, and as she soaks, 2 or 3 slaves attend her. One massages her temples with almond oil. Another rubs a paste of ground lupin beans along her arms to soften the skin. A third brushes her hair, now loose and damp, singing a low tune learned long ago in a different language from a different home. After the bath, she rests in her cubiculum, reclining on a couch, the coolness of linen against her skin. A slave fans her gently. Another prepares a small tray of sweet Sunni cakes, dates, candied almonds. These moments are not simply indulgence, they are symbols. To be well kept, well fed, and unhurried is to display one's place in the Roman order. And then she dresses again. Different gown, more formal earrings, a touch of cosmetic powder ground lead mixed with vinegar, applied carefully by yet another hand. It is nearing evening. Her husband will return soon. Guests may be coming, or perhaps there will only be a small meal, with poetry read by a household tutor, followed by dice games or news exchanged from the outer world. She does not prepare the meal. She does not clear the table. All of it is done around her, behind her, beyond her, and so it goes. Day after day, this world of velvet and goldiate surfaces, polished, its voices, lues not devoid of complexity. The patrician woman lives in privilege, yes, but she, too, is constrained by expectation, by visibility, by the need to perform dignity with every movement. Her freedom is structured. Her reputation can be ruined with a whisper, and so she relies on others to maintain it. The enslaved around her are her mirror. Their smooth function, their silence, their timing all reflect on her. If her hair is disheveled, she is blamed. If her gown is wrinkled, her status is questioned. If her dinner guests are poorly entertained, her household is shamed. And so she must manage not directly, often, but through a hierarchy of domestic staff, a head nutrix, a steward, a chief maid, each with authority over others, each bound in a system that wraps intimacy in hierarchy. Some slaves will remain in this world for life. Others may be mitted. A trusted ornatrix, for instance, might be freed upon her mistress's death. A scribe who handles family correspondence might earn a stipend, slowly purchasing freedom. These relationships are layered, built over years, sometimes affectionate, sometimes cold, rarely equal. The villa itself becomes a stage, and each member of the household, free or enslaved, plays a role. The curtain never closes. Appearances must be maintained. Yet, in the quiet corners of this life, There are moments of dissonance, the glance held too long between mistress and maid, the hesitation before an order is given, the recognition, perhaps, of shared exhaustion, of lives so intertwined they cannot be neatly separated. We often imagine Roman slavery in terms of whips and chains, but here, in the perfumed silence of a noblewoman's afternoon, is a subtler form of control. A system built not on pain, but on proximity, on the steady presence of bodies that serve and withdraw, listen and vanish. This is a world where power is wrapped in silk and silence in gold. The Roman Empire was a place of contradiction. Beneath its temples and triumphs lay hidden corridors of power, where the lowborn whispered advice to emperors, and slaves, once purchased for a handful of coins, guided decisions that shaped the fate of continents. In this final segment, we turn from the fields and villas to the shadowed halls of the Palatine Hill. Here, in the cool marble chambers of the imperial court, the divide between servant and master blurs, and nowhere is that more true than among the liberty-freed slaves who rose not through birth but through calculation. The court of Nero, like that of his predecessors, was layered. On its surface, the purple-cloaked emperor, the senate, the generals, and the priests. But behind the scenes, in whispered consultations and private notes, the true machinery of power hummed. Freedmen, former slaves, now legally free, but often still bound by loyalty, served as secretaries, informants, stewards, and confidants. In public, they stood discreetly by doors. In private, they read dispatches, managed imperial estates, coordinated assassinations. These men, because they were usually men, were not born into privilege. They earned it through proximity, trust, and usefulness, and in some cases, through ruthlessness. Imagine, for a moment, one such figure. His name is Narcissus, and he once belonged to Emperor Claudius. Purchased in his youth, trained in letters, he rose to manage correspondence. Over time, he became indispensable. By the end of Claudius's reign, Narcissus was not merely a clerky, was the gatekeeper of the emperor's thoughts. Or take Pallas, another freedman of Claudius, who managed the empire's finances. So vast was his control over revenue that senators referred to him as more powerful than the treasury itself. Yet Pallas had no noble blood. His father may have been a Greek slave. His path to power lay not through family, but through paperwork. And then there is Epaphroditus, once enslaved, later secretary to Nero. In the final hours of the emperor's life, when his enemies closed in and his supporters scattered, it was Epaphroditus who stood beside him, according to Tacitus. When Nero hesitated to take his own life, it was this freedman who delivered the final push, helping his master die with the sword rather than fall into enemy hands. He was rewarded for a time, then executed by a later emperor who mistrusted the loyalty of those too close to dead gods. These men inhabited a strange limbo. They were not citizens by birth, nor aristocrats by heritage. They had once been property, and though they now wielded influence, they were often resented for it. Senators bristled at their presence. Poets mocked them in verse. Satirists compared their rise to wearing stolen togas. And yet, emperors relied on them because they were efficient, discreet, and, above all, dependent. For the freedmen, there was no family legacy to uphold, no independent base of power. Their status, their wealth, even their lives, were tied to imperial favor. This made them both dangerous and vulnerable. They could rise higher than any senator and fall faster than any slave. The imperial palace was a place of illusion. Walls were lined with marble, ceilings painted with scenes of Olympus. Perfumed fountains masked the scent of power's decay. Here, advice was given not in formal audiences, but over wine, behind curtains, beneath the rustle of silk robes. A whisper from a freedman could mean a promotion or an execution. Among their duties, freedmen managed the emperor's personal affairs, love letters, bribes, surveillance. They arranged marriages, organized games, scheduled public appearances, and, when needed, they arranged poison. Under Nero's rule, poison became a political tool. The line between court physician and assassin was blurred. Freedmen controlled access to food, drink, medicine. A cup of wine poured with a bow might carry death within. The infamous Locusta, a professional poisoner, was reportedly commissioned by court officials, perhaps even acting at the suggestion of imperial freedmen. There were always layers to these acts. A freedman might serve the emperor out of loyalty, or ambition, or fear, perhaps all three. The point was not the motive, it was the result. Power, in this world, moved laterally, not always top-down. A senator might thunder in the forum, but it was a quiet freedman who decided which messages reached the emperor's eyes. A general might return from campaign to demand honor, but it was the freedman who prepared the banquet, and who noted, carefully, who whispered, too closely, too long. In these spaces, the divide between servitude and sovereignty was paper-thin. A freedman could sign a decree, but never own land in Italy. He could manage fortunes, but never run for office. His sons might become citizens, he never fully. And yet, some became fabulously wealthy. They built villas on the Bay of Naples, sponsored games, commissioned sculptures. Their names appear on inscriptions as patrons of baths, donors to temples. Still others vanished without trace, swallowed by shifting alliances, condemned in purges, erased by those who envied or feared them. The emperor himself, especially one as volatile as Nero, might love a freedman today and order his death tomorrow. Affection in the palace was as fragile as reputation. For enslaved people still within the court, these freedmen were both aspiration and warning. Here was a path to power, yes, but a narrow one, steeped in risk. The child who fetched wine for the imperial tutor might one day take his place or disappear. There were no guarantees. Even the wives of freedmen held complicated roles. Some were former slaves themselves, others citizens who married into wealth but carried the stigma of association. Their households mirrored those of the elite servants, tutors, scribes, but always with a sense of borrowed splendor. The grandeur could vanish overnight, and yet, in their rise, these freedmen reshaped Rome. They altered its power structures. They proved that influence could be earned, not inherited. And they unsettled the old nobility, who looked upon them with contempt, even as they depended on their services. In quiet ways, their presence challenged the notion that freedom alone conferred dignity, that status was destiny. The freedman walked a line between gratitude and cunning, deference and direction. He wore fine clothes, but remembered the feel of chains. He offered advice, but watched every word. So, as the emperor reclined on his couch, surrounded by poets and jesters, know that it was not always the nobleman who whispered into his ear. Sometimes it was the man who once polished his sandals. Sometimes it was the boy who used to stand behind the curtain, the former slave who knew too much, who listened too well, who remembered everything. And now the lights of the ancient world dim, and the clamor of Rome fades into stillness. The sandals are set aside, the scrolls rolled shut, the tools and torches tucked away. What remains is silence, the kind that settles gently over forgotten fields and cool marble halls, where the past no longer shouts, but hums, low and steady. We have wandered through the worn routines of a Roman slave, awakened in the dark to clean the remnants of luxury, marched through long days of labor, fear, and small, fragile hopes. We have stood beside Spartacus as the mountains echoed with the heavy tread of defiance, and we have passed beneath the shadows of the crosses that followed. We have sifted through soil and time, uncovering bones with iron collars and wax tablets that named human lives as inventory. We've stepped quietly into the prayers and private rites of the enslaved, lit small offerings at the household shrine, and felt the unspoken yearning that moved beneath their silence. We've sat with patrician women in shaded courtyards, listening to music offered by hands that could not refuse. And we've walked through palace corridors, where former slaves whispered into emperors' ears and signed letters that outlived the generals who mocked them. In every corner of this world, under sunlight and under lamplights, slavery was present, unseen by law, but felt in every detail. It shaped the empire's grandeur and held up its illusions. It bore the weight of roads and temples and banquets alike. Yet through all its cold machinery, the enslaved found moments of personhood, not freedom, always, but dignity, in small rituals, in shared glances, in stories passed softly from mouth to mouth. As you rest now, know that history does not sleep. It waits in stone foundations and faded ink, in the curve of amphory and the hush of ruined villas. It waits to be remembered, not in triumph, but in truth, in quiet truths that echo longer than speeches and linger long after the names have faded. Let yourself drift, slowly now, like ash settling on a mosaic floor. Let the noise of the world fall away, replaced by the steady rhythm of breath and memory. You are far from the clamor of the Roman streets, far from the glare of the palace torches. You are safe. You are warm. The empire lies behind you like a shadow at dusk fading into the soft hush of time. Sleep well.